You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Justice is Served. It is Wednesday, January 27th. I cannot believe we are almost done with the first month of 2016. We are your Justice is Served legal panel to bring you the legal news that we think you should know about and our thoughts and analysis on it. My name is Chelsea Galicia. I am your host and an LA workers' compensation attorney. I am joined by BJ Abron, who is a recent member of the California Bar Association? I guess, yeah. And comes to us from Compton's, done some work in the public defender's office and BET, Business and Legal Affairs. Right. And Shaka Smith comes to us from Miami, but also then go all over the eastern seaboard, Princeton and DC, and then to LA. Welcome, guys, and thanks for being with me. We got some interesting stories to cover today.
That we do.
The very first one, it was the shocking news yesterday about the Planned Parenthood investigations and the indictment that came out of Texas. This is surprising. So you'll remember that there were two activists, and the tide has greatly turned against them. They started off with the adoration of a lot of anti-abortion citizens in this country. They went undercover and got these videotaped conversations with them and Planned Parenthood employees where it appeared that there was like a transaction going down for the sale of fetal tissue and body parts and things like that. And this was a huge deal. We talked about defunding Planned Parenthood over this.
It wasn't even anti-abortion. It was just sort of everyone was shocked by it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, because the sale of fetal tissue is illegal, but Planned Parenthood said it's not selling it. What we're doing is get reimbursed for the costs associated with it, which is legal, although they stopped doing that after these videos came out.
But the way the picture was painted was just, and I'm pro-abortion. And even myself, you know, after I heard all of this news, this breaking news, it was just like, what is going on here?
Right. So it turns out that these videos were highly edited and misrepresented what was actually going on. They were showing images that were not images from Planned Parenthood. They would find images of aborted fetuses on the internet and then speak over them, narrate over them, and act like that was something that came out of Planned Parenthood. So. Right. Lots of interesting things going on to politically sway the opinion of Planned Parenthood by members of the public and Congress. It almost led to a government shutdown.
It definitely worked, yeah.
And then a bunch of states started investigating Planned Parenthood, and one of those states was Texas. And shockingly yesterday, out of Texas, in fact, Harris County, which is a pretty conservative county of Texas, came out with an indictment not against Planned Parenthood. They actually said they had not done anything wrong and indicted instead the anti-abortion activists.
Completely flipped it.
Holy schmoly. So, who's going to tell us about what they were charged with, BJ?
Yes, definitely. So these activists, or filmmakers as they're calling them now, David Daleiden and Sandra Mayer, they were both being charged with tampering with governmental records. And in this particular charge, it was for falsifying governmental IDs, or your identification card.
So we think that, and I don't know for sure, but it looks like they falsified driver's licenses, perhaps to have a fake identification.
Yeah. Because you could imagine when you're approaching someone to purchase something like this, they might do a background check on you. They want to figure out who you are.
Right. And apparently these people, or at least one of them, had set up a shell company, Biomax, something or other.
Created a Facebook page, to really.
And then set up a nonprofit Center for Medical Progress or something of that nature. Was all just sort of a shell scam.
A ruse to draw in Planned Parenthood.
Right.
Yeah. And so that charge, and that's a second-degree felony right there.
Okay, so that how many years can they face for that?
They're looking at 2 to 20 years for that. I mean, obviously it's a huge range of years. So depending on how lenient the judge is or the circumstantial factors involved in the case, obviously it'll fluctuate somewhere between 22 and 20 years.
All right, and then there was one of them got hit with another misdemeanor.
That was David Daleiden. He was hit with he was indicted for a count of prohibition of the purchase or sale of human organs.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one because we do know that he was doing it in order to draw Planned Parenthood in. So
Right.
we know that from a mental standpoint, he wasn't actually trying to.
It wasn't his goal to purchase them.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a mens rea requirement on that, like a state of mind where he actually intended to do it. I can't see that they would actually get him on that. That might be dropped or found not guilty on that one, but the falsifying.
But sometimes, I know a lot of times, if you take enough affirmative steps for something, that alone is enough evidence to show that you were in furtherance of that particular crime.
And I think obviously all the stuff that it took to actually get to the table to actually negotiate what was going on here, it was a sufficient amount of affirmative steps.
Yeah, they did set up a lot of things to do
Right.
it. All right, so what are the defenses that these activists you think will try and present?
Well, the main one that they're presenting is that they are essentially journalists, and journalists go undercover all the time, and these are things journalists do. However, journalists do not have a wide swath. They can't break the law in order to procure a story. Kind of gives me a little juxtaposition with the Sean Penn story that we covered last week, where Sean Penn met with El Chapo, and whether or not there were legal ramifications. But again, even when he met with El Chapo, he was not allowed to aid him in any way. Even any minutia of aid to El Chapo would have probably rendered Sean Penn culpable or guilty of some other crime. But here we see that they have taken active steps to actually commit a crime.
So it sounds like it's almost like an entrapment defense here.
To a certain degree, I think they're basically saying anything that we did in order to further a story as journalists, we should be fine.
I mean,
doing.
this makes it sound like you can go buy a lot of drugs, do a lot of drugs, and be like, I was just going undercover.
Writing a story, yeah.
So in that case, almost anybody, because there's no legal disqualification for what constitutes a journalist, anybody could become a journalist.
Yeah.
So anybody could use that defense. I don't see how that's going to go very well here. They're also saying they've got First Amendment rights to freedom of the press and speech and all that. So it's very vague.
And these things are not being attacked here with these charges. What's being attacked is the actual illegality of tampering with driver's licenses.
I don't see how your free
but from
speech.
a moral standpoint, and kind of moving the legal, which obviously we shouldn't do on the show, but kind of pushing the legal issues aside. I mean, I think we kind of need to be able to access organizations and companies and places that engage in these types of acts to expose.
Yeah, absolutely. There should be internal audit, but it has to be through the government because this is like a public agency. So there's a medical board that oversees it. There are, if Congress wanted to do it because some money does go to Planned Parenthood, they could do it. So there are ways.
And when you see investigative journalists, they go in as like applying for a job position, but they're still presenting their identification.
Right.
They're
Exactly.
still,
They're not falsifying records.
Yeah,
Right.
so there's definitely latitude to do that, but within the bounds of the law. And I think you're going to see these guys get a pretty heavy sentence because not only did they misrepresent what was happening, they didn't actually know who Sandra Merritt was when this happened. So they had the false ID that they had scanned at Planned Parenthood. They knew exactly who David Deleedian was, but they didn't know who she was, and he refused to let them know who she was. It was only later in a deposition that he coughed it up. So I think their reluctance to help with the investigation, coupled with what they produced, which was false, essentially.
Right. And
So if you think that there's a harsher sentencing here,
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
do you think it will be more or less what they deserve or an example being made out of these individuals?
I think it would be what they deserve to have a harsher sentence in like a 2 years, maybe something in between or towards the 20, because of the impact of what they did.
Yeah.
And
It was a huge impact.
And yeah, so it could have really changed the nature of the country, quite frankly.
So we should also add that, according to Planned Parenthood, officials in 11 states have cleared the group of any wrongdoing, and then there are officials in other 8 states that have declined to even investigate the accusations made by the Center for Medical Progress. So interesting stuff there. All right, moving on, shall we, to Daniel Holtzcaw. So was this just last month that we covered this officer in Oklahoma? He was a young guy, like 29, who was going around and pulling over black women. They were all black women. They had records, drugs, prostitution, poor women, and he would take advantage of them sexually in exchange for letting them out of arrest or ticket or something of that nature. And he was eventually caught and convicted of 18 counts, including 4 first-degree rape counts, as well as forcible oral sodomy, sexual battery, procuring lewd exhibition, and second-degree rape. He was acquitted on another 18 counts. So this was, I guess for me it was shocking, although I guess it shouldn't be that shocking.
Oh, yeah.
Now that we know that, I think they say that sexual misconduct is like the most complained about complaint against police officers right after excessive force, which I didn't know that until I had started to research this story. So the jury recommended 263 years. That we knew. And then at sentencing, the judge agreed. So what does this mean? He's going to be serving 263 years consecutively. And that was another issue, because whether it was going to be concurrently or consecutively. Shaka, do you want to clarify what that means?
Yeah, for those who don't know, a lot of times if there's several charges that you're looking at, the judge will say you can serve them together. So if charge one carried 10 years, charge two carried another 10 years, I would only serve 10 years if I was serving them concurrently, as opposed to consecutively, where it would be 20 years. And so I think the judge really wanted to underscore the very seriousness nature of this conviction. And I think it was, spot on.
263 years.
Yeah.
That's several lifetimes. Good luck or good riddance. There's also civil lawsuits pending.
Yeah, and his appeal bond was denied, which was also good. So he's not able to be out while on appeal because, of course, 263 years, who's not going to run, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, so I guess, good news, but tragic. All right, moving on to where I'm all twisted around. Oh yes, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
So there are so many updates and various stories that are all under the umbrella of police killing of unarmed black men that we sort of wanted to present it all together here. And we've got a couple of pieces of good news and a couple of pieces of bad news. So, Shaka, will you give us the good news?
Well, the good news is there was a shooting recently. Was it? Do we have
Anthony Hill?
Anthony Hill, yes. And so Anthony Hill was unarmed, naked black man. He was shot by the police officer, and the police officer was thankfully indicted for that shooting.
Yeah, this one was so sad to me.
Yeah.
He was 27 years old. He was a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. He suffered from
bipolar,
right, and PTSD, which I would imagine, but I didn't read, was related to service. So he was back here, and he was having a manic episode, and during that confrontation with a police officer in like a parking of an
complex,
of an apartment building or something like that, he was shot and killed.
The officer alleged that he was actually charging towards him at that time. So, I think that'll still make for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, but something other than ending
Deadly
this man's
force, yeah.
life,
Right.
who, we talk a lot in this country about mental illness, and this guy was mentally ill, and I feel bad because he was like mentally ill on our behalf, I believe, if it's related to him.
Serving, yeah.
Oh my God, that's just so heartbreaking. So, some, I guess, good news on that. Any other piece of good news you got for us, Shaka?
Any other piece of good news?
The Ferguson protesters.
Oh, yes, the Ferguson protesters. I don't have it in front of me, but they were, the charges have been dropped against the protesters.
Yeah. So there was like almost a dozen of them. How many of them were arrested in February for the 6-month anniversary of Michael Brown's death.
Right.
And they were protesting in Ferguson, and they were arrested for things like
immediately, yeah.
property destruction, resisting arrests, assault charges, things of that nature. And Ferguson was serious about these charges, had them arrested, and then all the way up to the day of trial had these people believing that they were going to face trial. Then the morning of trial, the prosecutor apparently shows up late, walks up to the judge, and drops off a handwritten note to the judge and announces charges are dropped.
Right.
Which is good news, but it's also infuriating.
Yeah, and the manner it was done,
Right.
So.
But there was a lot that was going on in that case, in the process. First of all, these officers are violating civil rights. And especially we're doing a compare contrast. You compare it to the militia. I think was that in Oregon.
Yeah.
These guys who are armed and actually made statements
And
affirmatively
they were
stating
there.
that we will use our weapons.
And they got 22 days? Because it started January 2nd, and it was just 2 days ago or yesterday
Right.
they've gone
Where
into
something actually has happened there.
Yeah.
Now, but when you compare it to this, these are people who are unarmed. They're standing up not for They're standing for because a life was taken.
They're not trying to. They're not trying to undermine the government.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, this was, great the charges were dropped, but just a really bad situation.
Shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Yeah. Apparently there was a lot of video body cams that
came up missing.
Right.
Some came up missing.
The officers were saying the body cams don't always work
Malfunctioned,
well.
yeah.
So this case was a mess, and I think prosecutors knew they probably weren't going to win. And even if they did, this was still not going to bring peace to the streets of Ferguson.
Right.
And so I think they made the right call in dropping it. Made it a little late, but all right, fine. So that's the good news. Now we got some bad news. BJ, you want to tell us about that?
Well, we have some. I guess it's kind of like good and bad news. The fact that the video was released was good. And the Cedric Chapman case, a kid from Chicago, a teenager who was actually shot and killed after retreating and running away from a police officer in the chase. And we're not showing the video footage because you can't actually see the incident.
You don't see it
fully
very
occur.
well.
Right.
Yeah, it was this camera that was like out in the street and it was like rotating. So it would show a piece of the street for like 5 seconds and then
Right.
switch to another and it would go around in like a circle. And you could actually see the moment where the guy, you just see off in the distance, guy's running away, he's shot, and then he goes down.
Right.
You don't see it up close.
Right.
And this is 2013.
Correct.
Yeah, it's 2013 when the incident happened. So
Yeah.
the video of it was released
Just last week, right?
Yeah.
But this happened
yeah.
in 2013, and no officer faced any
no consequences.
consequences,
And the kid
so.
he wasn't carrying any weapon. He was carrying what they said was a stolen cell phone box. So obviously it wasn't a particular circumstance where there was a threat to the police officer.
Yeah, I don't understand this at all because you could see on the video that the guy is moving away from the officer, and at least in the range that the camera covers, you don't see anybody else there. So
Right.
the defense of like I was protecting the public or myself just doesn't seem to
Yeah.
make sense here.
Yeah.
I know that I only got to see like a 3-4 second clip of the moment it happened, but it didn't make sense to me. So yeah, that is bad news. And
So that-
then
I mean,
a little
that-
bit more bad news, BJ.
Yeah, so along with that, obviously, and that type of video is hardening to see, or that type of incident. But in the course of 2015, or over the past number of years, we could actually go and say there's been no new legislation to assist with the processing and setting up circumstances that would help us to deviate from these types of acts from the police officers
Right.
taking place. So
And I think that's the infuriating part. That's why you see people protesting.
Right.
I think we all have an understanding of bad things happen, but why is nothing happening to help improve these situations?
Yeah.
So apparently every time somebody tries to propose something that would reduce the number of people that are killed by police officers, then police, the unions, and whoever advocates for them says that now we're endangering the lives of police
yeah.
officers.
And-
But it doesn't make sense because one of the articles that I read talked about us comparison with Britain.
And how few officers over there are actually attacked.
And
or-
I understand that we're not the same. America is a much different place. It's a bigger place. That place is like a giant island, and they don't have gun rights the same way that we do. But even looking at incidents with like knives, people there still attack officers with knives. And I think I saw that since 2008, only one of those suspects, those citizens who had attacked an officer with a knife, was actually killed out of thousands and thousands.
Right.
So I think there is clearly room for us to look at the way that other countries are doing things. I guess it's difficult
the
to
question that
legislate.
needs to be answered is when should deadly force by police officers be used?
Yeah.
I mean, how are these other officers in other countries finding ways to resolve these issues without killing people? Do they have better technology? Do they have better training? De-escalation? I know that
It's the culture of the police department. I mean, we can look at technology. We pride ourselves on being one of the best countries in the world. And, so I don't want to let it fall back on technology, on money. It's the culture that has been embedded in this police department for decades, for centuries.
Yeah.
And that's the problem here. We have to change that culture.
And
It's shoot
and
first,
it's
ask
difficult
questions
to
later.
legislate a culture.
Yeah.
Or can we?
Well, we start with training. We start with, I think better metrics as to who is even allowed to join the police force.
Yeah. And we have talked about how there's going to be better records kept on these kinds of things so that we'll know more precisely where we should target the efforts. So maybe I'm not surprised that no new legislation has come down.
I mean, you could. It's so many different type of procedures that could be implemented. You could implement stuff that, in fact, they actually have in certain police departments, they have procedures where you cannot engage a suspect in certain circumstances because it may increase your risk of injury. And so what you see a lot of circumstances, these police officers increasing their risk of injury, and then they're firing weapons because they're fearful at that point.
But they escalate the situation.
They escalated the situation.
If you've ever had a job in retail, when I was 16, I worked in retail, and they said if someone's shoplifting and they run, let them go.
Right.
Let them go, because your safety is the first, the primary
importance.
Exactly, and so for police officers, isn't their safety of primary importance? If someone's running and you feel that they would have posed a deadly threat, let them go. Do your investigative work to find them and arrest them, but do so in a way that does not endanger your life or doesn't necessitate you using deadly excessive force.
I mean, it's just so crazy that it's just like in one moment somebody gets to be judge, jury, and executioner. And I understand that some of these officers are in fear, but it doesn't make sense with the number. So many. I mean, almost 1,200 people were killed by police officers last year.
And those numbers,
which is like I think two or three times the number of people that we legally executed. Mm-hmm. So
but
the numbers just out of
just like
control.
BJ said, when you look at culture and you look at, especially how police are taught to act in poorer neighborhoods or with people that look to them urban or, these police, they're taught that, and they're taught that you have to do that in order to keep yourself safe.
Right.
So in some ways it's their fault. In other ways, I don't believe it's their fault at all.
All right. So I also, one of these like feel-good videos that I've seen on Facebook, have you seen some like police officers that are playing basketball with the kids in the community and things like that? I mean, things like that where you can't legislate, but just great things like that would help change the culture.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And that's something that not only needs to be done with the police officers, that's something that also needs to take place with the district attorney's office as well. Yeah. We need to fully engage our government in our systems and our processes of prosecutorial, whatever
discretion.
Exactly, and we need to engage the community. So I'm not just the the public defender's office as well. We need to get all of these units in a community and actually revive the relationship.
Yeah, I guess you can stay too long in an office or in a courtroom and lose touch with the people and the lives that you're impacting in the communities. And
around the holidays, I believe someone donated to one of the police departments, some large excessive amount of money, but the donation was for the police department to go out and individually hand out $100 bills to people that needed it.
Interesting.
And that just started to change the way that community
builds trust between, and not just for the citizens, but also for the police officers. Because now you're engaging these people.
These aren't the dangerous people that I look at them
protecting.
As.
And see, that's the problem. You don't you don't go and look at the situation as you're protecting the community there. You're actually there. You're actually just arresting people.
Exactly.
Right?
But that because of the way that we measure success in these police departments.
It's that
number
culture.
of arrests, amount of money brought in. The prosecutors are evaluated based on their percent of
quotas,
guilty pleas. So there's a lot to be done. All right, moving on now, and something that is being done in the justice system, at least in the juvenile justice system, is President Obama banning the use of solitary confinement in federal prisons for kids. Big deal or not a big deal?
I think it's a pretty big deal. It's something, as far as I'm concerned, this should have never taken place in the first place anyway. Remember, and I know we talked about this earlier, the prison industrial complex, in its origin, was meant as a rehabilitative process. So if someone is mentally ill, if someone just, is engaging in crime, and that's why even more than it should be viewed as a rehabilitative process.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
These types of acts should not take place.
So apparently President Obama had a study done, an investigation done, and it turns out that putting kids in solitary confinement will lead to depression, anxiety, social isolation. I mean, obvious things, but apparently we need a study for everything these days. Increases the likelihood that they'll engage in violent conduct. So this was clearly moving in the wrong direction. You make kids angrier. And I think this is a good first step. It was relatively non-controversial. I don't think that this is super politically charged. I don't think anybody is saying put more kids in solitary confinement.
Yeah, I think that's why he went for this, because he knew I think prison reform is something that he hadn't gotten a chance to really tackle. And you look at a lot of our mass shootings, and we're talking about mental illness, and where is that some of that's being fomented, and some of that's being fomented in these prisons with these children being solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And so I think it starts to begin to tackle the problem, the overall problem between these kind of shootings. And how we look at mental illness today.
Yeah, so I think this is good. So now they're going to have to look at other means of discipline in prison. Probably a good thing. I was shocked to read that there are as many as 100,000 people in solitary confinement in U.S. prisons. I was shocked by this number. Shaka's like, meh.
Well, I mean, I wasn't so shocked. You know, the population's, 300 million, 100,000 people. And, you know, working with a public defender, I did see some people that solitary confinement was good for them, you know. And so the number, it sounds high, but I think when you look at the percentages, it's probably not that high.
Yeah.
But what I would be in favor of is some oversight over who's going into solitary
I mean,
confinement.
that is really,
Is there
really
an appeals
harsh.
process?
And how would that
And some
oversight look, though?
I think you could have the public defender could come in, and
Yeah.
you know there could be a division of the public defender that works, you know, that to come in and see why they're in solitary confinement. Is there any appeals process? How long?
Right.
Why are they there for
I think
this?
that's a great idea.
I mean, because some people are in there for like months and
Years, yeah.
President Obama, in this announcement, was talking about a kid who was 16 years old, placed in solitary confinement for like months. I can't remember. Months? No. And then 2 years later committed suicide. So really tragic results, and that just, you know, shouldn't happen. And we can't say for sure that the suicide was directly related to the solitary confinement, but surely
But you
couldn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's a good first step. And now we're going to end on some breaking news. So if you remember, I think was this last month or maybe it was November. God, everything's going by so quickly right now.
January's almost over.
There was this officer in Illinois, Officer Glinowich, who had radioed to dispatch that he was chasing suspects, 2 white men, 1 black man, and then officers came to the scene and found Officer Glinowich dead.
Yeah.
There was a massive manhunt,
Right.
a huge funeral, a hero's salute. Everybody was talking about what a great man this was, what a tragedy it was to lose him. He was just months away from retirement. And then the investigation turns, and we all find out that Officer Glinowich staged the whole thing. It was actually a suicide, that he was trying to avoid repercussions for basically stealing from a nonprofit organization that he was the head of. Yeah. And then now today we got the news that his wife was indicted. What was she indicted for?
For misappropriating those funds, using the funds for personal trips, you know, food, lunches, Starbucks. But I think her defense is that she's a victim of his malfeasance. And they didn't really give too many details regarding how direct she was involved. Because it wasn't clear if he gave her a credit card and said, this is your card, and if that was drawing from the funds. So from the details I've seen, I'm not sure exactly if she does have a wiggle room to kind of get out of this.
I think it'll be interesting to find out actually what the facts were that led them to actually prosecute her for this.
Yeah, very interesting. Alrighty, guys, I think that is it for us. As always, you can tweet me at Chelsea Galicia.
Me at what?
Just BJ
Abron.
Abron.
There we go. There it is.
And Shaka Strong, and we should probably do a little plug. Next week we will be doing our Making a Murderer special.
Yes, 2-hour special. Tweet us your questions about making a murderer, and maybe we will answer it here for you on the show.
Yep.
See you next week, guys.
Thank you.
From executives Kevin Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio. Instagram me at KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in.
Hollywood Redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.